A very good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Singaram. In today's discussion, I'll be doing the FMG questions in the internal medicine section, which came in the recently conducted August 2020 session. I have around 40 plus questions to be discussed, so I'll be discussing under two parts. This will be part 1. The links for the part 2 will be shared at the end of this video, as well as it will be available in the description and the comment section below. I have also done the discussion of pediatrics question which came in the same exam, the links of which are available at the end of this video as well as in the description section. So let us get started with the first question. The first question is an image based question to identify the device, whether it's a dry powder inhaler, meter dose inhaler, nebulizer or a peak flow meter. It is a straightforward question. The answer is it's a dry powder inhaler. Okay, that is what we commercially refer to as the rotahaler. It's a device to deliver the medications to the respiratory tract in patients suffering from diseases like asthma. What is this rotahaler? Rotahaler, first of all, remember, it's a breath activated device. So it is dependent on the patient's respiratory effort. So it cannot be used for young children. It is used for older children, say for more than 5 years, and in adults. That's what is the common usage of this device. And because it is breath activated, dependent on the patient's respiratory effort, you cannot use this situation during times of an emergency, like for example exacerbation of asthma. Suppose the patient is presenting to the casualty with a severe asthma, you cannot use it at that time because it is dependent on patient's respiratory effort. The advantage of this rotahaler device is that it's a very portable device, number one. Number two is that it does not contain any chlorofluorocarbon. So what is the advantage of this? It is going to be environment friendly. These are the points you need to remember regarding the rotahaler. Very important. That's what we commonly refer to as a dry powder inhaler. Now just an idea about the other devices. You can look at this picture. The picture on the left side, this is the nebulizer. This one is the nebulizer. Right side is what we commonly use in the pediatric population and in the adolescents also. What is that? It is MDI. What is MDI? MDI is meter dose inhaler. This is the MDI actually. This one is the spacer, which is used to space the drug coming out from the MDI, and this one is the face mask. Remember, all of these may not be required. An adult may be required only an MDI, but for a small child, spacer along with the mask is required. And what is the last one which is given at the bottom? It is the peak flow meter. It is called as a peak flow meter. What is the use of this instrument? It is not for delivering any medication. It is for assessment of peak expiratory flow rate, PEFR, peak expiratory flow rate. One of the important measurements done while evaluating the respiratory diseases. Right. Let's move on to the next question. In a chronic alcoholic, after 48 hours of completely stopping alcohol intake, he develops tremors, visual hallucination, tachycardia and disorientation. What is the diagnosis? 4 options are given: delirium tremens, hallucinations, alcoholic aversion, anxiety disorder. Please remember, out of these 4 options, the 2 important and confusing options for the student are, one is the delirium tremens and the other one is alcoholic hallucinations. Okay, right. Which of these 2 is the answer for this question? Before I answer this, let us look at a comparison between the 2 conditions, alcoholic hallucination and delirium tremens. The first one is alcoholic hallucination. The onset of alcoholic hallucination is usually around 12 to 24 hours after the last drink, and it usually lasts for 48 hours maximum, though it can occur for few days as well, but general duration is 48 hours. Hallucinations are present. Usually you have visual hallucination. The other features are absent. Okay, I'll come to other features. An important point I would want to emphasize here is that the sensorium of the patient suffering from just alcoholic hallucinations is normal. This is a very important point. Now coming to the delirium tremens. Delirium tremens is something which occurs after day 1. Okay, and it is usually peaking around 48 to 72 hours after stopping the last drink. Okay, and duration, it can occur for few days. Okay, so something like 7 to 10 days it can occur. Hallucination again are present. Here you can have any type of hallucination, visual as well as auditory. In fact, some of the books are saying auditory hallucinations are more common in delirium tremens compared to alcoholic hallucination. Now other features are the differentiating points. Here the patient shows disorientation. Okay, his sensorium is not normal. And other additional findings would be the patient may be having tachycardia, that is increase in the heart rate. The patient may be having fever, as well as increase in the blood pressure or hypertension. These are the differentiating features between alcoholic hallucination and delirium tremens. Now coming back to the question was after 48 hours of alcohol intake. Okay, it is not on the first day. Then he has tremors, he has visual hallucination, he also has what? Tachycardia, and most important, he is having disorientation. All of these favor the diagnosis of delirium tremens in this particular patient. I hope it should be clear by now. Let's move to the next question. During physical examination of a male with intellectual disability, following findings are noted. Long face, large testis with the CGG repeat expansion noted by PCR testing. What is the probable diagnosis? Remember, intellectual disability refers to the low IQ. It can be seen in many conditions, including the options like Down syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, Fragile X syndrome. In Turner syndrome, it should be remembered that the patient usually has a normal IQ. Okay, now among the remaining three options, how to come to the diagnosis is based on the clinical features. Long face, large testis, very characteristic, and even even more important from the exam purpose is this CGG repeats. Okay, CGG is a trinucleotide. Excess of repeats is what we call it as a trinucleotide repeat disorders. And there are some examples of the trinucleotide repeat disorder, and among the option there is only one trinucleotide repeat disorder, and that is the answer for this question. What is that? Yes, it is Fragile X syndrome. A very important question. These long face and large testes are other characteristic features of this particular condition. Fragile X syndrome, an important topic, so that's why I'll just give some more info on this. It is a most common inherited cause of intellectual disability. Remember, it's an inherited cause. Okay, right. Suppose the question is asking you which is the most common cause of intellectual disability. They have not mentioned anything like inherited. Then your answer is going to be Down syndrome. Okay, most common inherited cause of intellectual disability is Fragile X, whereas most common cause of intellectual disability as such is Down syndrome. Okay, the features of Fragile X syndrome can be remembered by the name Fragile X itself. F stands for FMR1 gene, which is the gene which is abnormal in case of Fragile X syndrome. Obviously, the gene is on the X chromosome. That is why it's called Fragile X syndrome. R is for the repeats. What is the repeats you get? It's a very important question. It is CGG repeats is what you get in case of Fragile X syndrome. Okay, A stands for ADHD, which is an association with this condition. What is ADHD? It is a attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. G for gonads. You can remember like this. Gonads. Gonads is large. That means what? The testis is large. Okay. Now this is one of the very few conditions which is associated with the big testis. You can just remember in this way. What is that? You can remember like this: congenital giant gonads. Like that you can remember. Congenital giant gonads is the way for you to remember. Why I am asking you to remember like this? You can remember two things. One is the size of the testis, which is bigger. Second is you look at the first three alphabets of the letters. Okay, C, G, G, which is actually the repeat which you get in case of this Fragile X syndrome. Okay, I for intellectual disability. That's what we were saying. Low IQ, intellectual disability. Okay, right. LE you can remember for large ears. Large ears. F also you can remember one more thing. It's a large or a elongated face. It's an elongated face, not actually large but elongated face. These are the features of Fragile X syndrome. A very potential topic for the coming exams also. Let's move to the next question. In a patient presenting with fever, difficulty in swallowing, and a white patch in the throat, swab was taken and stained with Albert stain. Following finding is noted. What is the diagnosis? Albert stain is a special stain. Okay. And what do you see in the picture? You see a picture which has got something like this rods. Okay. And at the end of that, what you can see is some different color. Okay. You can see that the main picture is greenish in color, but at the end there are some dots which are actually purplish in color. Okay. So that means that part is different from the rest of the thing. Okay. Remember, a patient presenting with fever, difficulty in swallowing, as well as a patch in the throat, we are suspecting some pharyngitis, is it not? Okay, we are suspecting some infection. Okay, for that particular infection only this Albert stain is being done. Remember this point. Albert stain itself will tell you the diagnosis that it is done for cases of diphtheria, and the answer for this particular question. What are you actually looking at the picture is the Corynebacterium diphtheriae, which is a club shaped bacteria. And what is the special feature of this? at the end it has got something called as a metachromatic granules, okay, because they are staining with a different color. That's why they are called as metachromatic. Chromatic means the color, different colors, so they are called as a metachromatic granules. Okay, right. It can be picked up by the special stain. One of the special stains is Albert stain. What are the other special stains which can be used while evaluating a case of Corynebacterium diphtheria? They are the Neisser stain and the Ponder stain. So two important MCQs to be remembered. These are the special stains for Corynebacterium diphtheria. Right. Let's move on to the next question. A very important question. In a patient with no pulse, or it was given as cardiac arrest in the question, CPR is started and following is noted on ECG tracing. What should be done next? What are you seeing in the ECG strip which is given? Okay, there is no activity, absolutely no electrical activity from the heart. Okay, and the patient is in cardiac arrest. Okay, so this is called as asystole. Remember, in asystole, you cannot give something like defibrillation at all. It will never work because it's a non-shockable rhythm. Okay, so what is the thing you have to do to increase the activity of the heart? Yes, you have to give adrenaline IV. Okay, and that is going to be the answer for this particular question. Now, when we talk about the rhythms, ECG rhythms during cardiac arrest, we can divide them into non-shockable rhythm and shockable rhythm. Non-shockable rhythms, you cannot deliver any type of shock. You just have to continue the CPR or give adrenaline. Okay, and the examples of the non-shockable rhythm are one which is given in the question, that is asystole. Second is PEA. What is PEA? PEA means pulseless electrical activity. Okay, there may be some activity in the heart, but there is no pulse or heart rate. Okay, so that's called pulseless electrical activity. Both these are non-shockable. You cannot give shock or defibrillation in these cases. Shockable rhythms are the ones where you are going to give defibrillation immediately, because that can revert the heart back to the normal rhythm. Okay, so defibrillation or the shockable rhythms are two. One is the ventricular fibrillation, other one is a ventricular tachycardia. Right. So these are the rhythms encountered during cardiac arrest. A potential question for the future also. Yes. Next is a straightforward question, very simple question. Most of you must be knowing this. Water lily sign on ultrasound of the liver is noted in which of the following condition? Trichinella, malaria, ascariasis and hydatid cyst. Okay, I have given the picture. The picture was actually not asked, only the water lily sign was asked. Yes, the answer is straightforward. It is hydatid cyst. What is this water lily sign? Water lily sign is nothing but the detached membrane which is floating. Okay, detached endocyst membrane of the hydatid which is actually floating. That's what you can see in these two pictures, is it not? It looks like the water lily which is given by the side. Okay, so this is called as a water lily sign, a very important sign. What I have given is a ultrasound picture of the liver. Okay, it can also be seen by X-ray if the membrane is calcified. It can also be seen by CT or MRI. Okay, these are the points to be remembered. Next question, a chronic alcoholic patient presented with bleeding gums and perifollicular hemorrhages. Which of the following level should be checked for? Remember this, a chronic alcoholic patient is prone for so many deficiencies. Okay, he is prone for so many deficiencies in the vitamin as well as some clotting factors. Okay, that is a very common point all of you will be remembering. But here the question is specifically asking about these manifestations, bleeding gums and perifollicular hemorrhages. These are very, very characteristic of scurvy, which is due to vitamin C deficiency. Very, very important point. Why do you get bleeding manifestations in case of vitamin C deficiency? Is because vitamin C is very, very essential for maturation of collagen. So what will happen in case of this scurvy? You will get immature collagen. Now this immature collagen cannot provide adequate support to the tissues, including the blood vessels. That is why this patient is going to develop bleeding tendencies. Okay, there are some characteristic bleeding manifestations which you encounter in case of scurvy. One is the bleeding from the gums. Second is the perifollicular hemorrhage. Third is a very important point. It is subperiosteal hemorrhage also. It is subperiosteal hemorrhage. So what happens? The patient may not be able to move the leg at all because of the subperiosteal hemorrhage and the pain. So what happens when you look at that patient? The patient will be appearing as if he is paralyzed, but it is not due to paralysis. It is only due to this painful bleeding. He is not able to move the leg. So this is called as pseudo paralysis. A very important point to be noted. It's a feature of scurvy. Okay, pseudo paralysis. So for this particular question, what will be the answer? Now it should be very clear. it is ascorbic acid because that is the vitamin C. Okay, estimation of ascorbic acid should be done in these cases. Let's move on to the next question. A patient presents with color blindness. Maternal uncle has a similar problem. What is the inheritance of this disease? Remember, in fact, one of the common inheritance of this color blindness, it's a straightforward question actually, is X-linked recessive. Okay, to give you the clue only, they have given that the maternal uncle. Okay, maternal uncle means it is seen in the males. Okay, right? To give you a clue, they have given as maternal uncle. Anyway, occurrence of disease in the males and the females are carriers is very characteristic of X-linked recessive, and color blindness is one of the typical examples of X-linked recessive disorder. The next one is a tough question. Many students were not able to answer it because it's slightly of a higher level question, but still we'll be discussing this. A child since birth has drooping of the upper eyelid. What is the drooping of the upper eyelid? Yet it is a ptosis except while eating and drinking. That means while eating and drinking, okay, some movement of the jaw, okay, like drinking, eating and all, the child's ptosis is disappearing. That's all. That's what they are saying. So generally ptosis is present, but while drinking and eating, ptosis is absent. What is the condition? Okay, first I'll tell you the answer, then I'll go to the description. Answer is, it is neurogenic ptosis. It's actually called as congenital neurogenic ptosis, and this phenomenon of ptosis improving while the child is drinking and eating is called as a Marcus-Gunn phenomenon. Okay, Marcus-Gunn phenomenon. It's actually a part of neurogenic congenital ptosis. What is the reason that ptosis is improving? Okay, it is due to something like abnormal connections between between the fifth cranial nerve, that is the trigeminal nerve, and the third cranial nerve, which is supplying the levator muscles. Okay, which is supplying the levator muscles. Okay, right. So what happens is that it's a branch of the third cranial nerve. Okay, so what happens is that when the child is doing some movements of the jaw, for example drinking and eating, what happens is that will cause innervation of this muscle also, and it will elevate the lids. The levator muscle will be working. Are you able to follow? This is called as Marcus-Gunn phenomenon. The other name of this Marcus-Gunn phenomenon, it is also called as jaw winking trigemino-oculomotor phenomenon. Okay, you can see that trigemino means the fifth nerve and the oculomotor means the third nerve. So it's an abnormal connection between the fifth and the third cranial nerve. Okay, right. So the answer for this question is congenital neurogenic ptosis, a tough question. The next one is also relatively tough question because many students may not have seen this type of pictures or might have not seen this instrument in their undergraduation, but still we'll discuss it. Identify the tube. Okay, it is straightforward question, one liner. It is double lumen endotracheal tube. So you can see that there are two lumens here. Okay, that's actually dividing. Okay, once you enter into the trachea, then the tube divides into two, so that it will enter into the two bronchi or the two lungs separately. Okay, right. So why do you need this type of tube? Okay, double lumen endotracheal tube. This is usually done during thoracic surgeries. See what happens in case of thoracic surgery. Suppose they are operating on a single lung. Okay, they want the ventilation to continue in the other lung. So for selective ventilation, so this is called as selective ventilation. Okay, so one of the lumen would be open. Okay, selective ventilation. So one of the lumen would be open and that lung will take part in the ventilation. Are you able to follow? Whereas the other lung would be operated upon. Okay, so this is what is the purpose of this double lumen endotracheal tube. The next is a clinical question, very simple question. It's a very common procedure which we do in the wards also. Identify the procedure being done. Okay, I'll tell you the answer, then I will tell you some differences. See, only two answers are possible here. One is the fluid thrill, second is the shifting dullness. Ballotability is something like you are just moving the organ up and down. It is done usually in cases of ballotability is done while examining for the kidney masses. Okay, guarding of the abdomen means the patient will not even allow you to touch the abdomen. Okay, it's something like guarding the abdomen. Okay, it is usually encountered in case of peritonitis. You will not be able to do the abdomen examination in these patients. Okay, peritonitis. Okay, generally. Now, so it is going to be fluid thrill or shifting dullness. The answer for this particular question is fluid thrill. What are you doing? You are just tapping on one side of the abdomen, okay, or one flank region, and you feel for the impulse on the other side. Okay, feel for the impulse on the other side of the flank. Okay, so tap on one side of the flank region and feel for the impulse on the other side of the flank region. Okay, this is what we call it as fluid thrill. Yes, of course, it is done in cases of ascites. Okay, to look for the fluid inside the abdomen. Shifting dullness is also a test for detecting the fluid inside the abdomen, but it's a different test. I'll give the picture here. Okay, when the patient is lying supine, you can see that the dullness will be noted in these region. It will be dull. Okay, whereas this will be normal or resonant or tympanic note. Okay, you will be getting once you just start the percussion. Remember, here you have to percuss. This is based on percussion. Dullness will be in the lower region, then in the center area it will be normal, okay, right, or tympanic note or resonant note. Okay, now once you put the patient into a lateral position or recumbent position, you can see that the next picture is showing the patient in the recumbent position. Because now the gravity is to this side, here there will be dullness. Okay, this side there will be dullness, but all these areas it will be normal or resonant or having a tympanic note on percussion. This is called as shifting dullness. Okay, one which is given in the picture is fluid thrill, and the answer for this particular question. Let's move to the next question. A very important, very important. We always say that so many times in the classes that this interpretation of hepatitis B serology is very important, and they have asked this time also. Interpret the following serology findings. IgG anti-HBC is positive, anti-HBsAg is positive. What would be the diagnosis in this case? Yes, let us go from the first option. In case of this chronic hepatitis B infection, HBsAg should be positive, not anti-HBsAg is positive, right? So that itself will rule out this particular option. In case of a recent hepatitis infection, you need to have IgM type of antibody, right? Okay, recent infection is always IgM, but what is given in the question? It is IgG antibody which is given in the question. Third is immunized against hepatitis B. If the patient is immunized against hepatitis B, he would have only anti-HBsAg positive. Okay, because it's a subunit vaccine, right? We are giving only that HBs subunit. Okay, so what happens? Anti-HBsAg alone will be positive. You will not get IgG anti-HBC. Okay, right. So what is left and the answer for this question? It is recovery from hepatitis B, because the patient has already developed the antibody to both core antigen as well as the HBsAg antigen. Okay, HBs antigen. So the answer for this particular question is that the patient has recovered from hepatitis B. He is safe to give the he is safe from hepatitis B infection. Okay, right. So that's about this particular question. Let's move on to the next question. In vitamin D resistance, which of the following usually occurs? Right. Now, please remember that vitamin D is essential. Now, the question is regarding the action of vitamin D on the kidney. Okay, right. It's on the kidney. So let us discuss the actions of vitamin D on the kidney. Vitamin D helps in the reabsorption of calcium and phosphorus from the kidney. This is the basic concept all of you should be remembered. Okay, reabsorption of calcium and phosphorus from the kidney in the tubules. Okay, right. In vitamin D resistance, what is happening? Resistance means what? The receptors of the vitamin D are not responding. They are not responding. Okay, not responding. So what happened? The action of vitamin D is not going to happen. So in other words, reabsorption of calcium and phosphorus from the kidney is not going to happen. Now please remember this. Whenever there is a vitamin D resistance or vitamin D deficiency, there is an increase in the levels of parathyroid hormone. This is a very important point. Okay. Now this PTH, okay, will cause reabsorption of calcium. I'll just write absorption. It's actually reabsorption of calcium from the kidney. Okay. Remember this very important point. It will not absorb the phosphorus from the kidney. In fact, phosphorus will be lost from the kidney only, but calcium will get absorbed from the kidney under the influence of PTH. Now tell me the answer for this question. In vitamin D resistance, what is going to happen? Yes. Only phosphate is not reabsorbed from the kidney. Okay, calcium will be reabsorbed under the influence of PTH. Very simple. Okay, right. So the answer for this question is option A. Let's move on to the next question. A chronic alcoholic met with an accident. On examination of the patient, the following findings were noted. What is the possible diagnosis? Right. Now, what you are seeing in the pictures, you are seeing some very characteristic findings. One is this is the icterus. You are seeing the icterus in the sclera. Okay, what you are seeing is that the patient hands are folded like this. This is actually due to contracture called as a Dupuytren's contracture. Okay, very classical Dupuytren's contracture. Next is you are seeing this tense abdomen, distended abdomen, that is the ascites. Okay, all these are features which are occurring due to decompensated liver disease. What we call it as a cirrhosis of the liver. Decompensated liver disease. What we call it as cirrhosis of the liver, and the answer for this question. Some of the students were thinking, okay, might have marked that alcoholic liver disease. Remember, alcoholic liver disease is a large spectrum. Okay, it includes hepatitis, fatty liver, all those things. Okay, and it includes the cirrhosis in the late stage also. But then you have got one very clear option in the form of cirrhosis of the liver or decompensated liver disease, and it is better that whenever they give you the manifestation, you go for that option rather than just a broad option like alcoholic liver disease. Specific option and the answer for this question is cirrhosis of the liver, which is decompensated liver disease. Let's move to the next question. In a patient with fever, these clinical findings were noted. Which of the following finding can be noted in the abdomen is the question. Now let us look at what are the clinical findings which are given. There are two clinical findings which are given in the fingers. Okay, one is this red lesions in the palm, which is called as a Janvey lesions, called as a Janvey lesions. Second is you are seeing in the fingers, usually in the tip of the fingers. Okay, they are called as the Osler's nodes, which are painful lesions. Next, what you are seeing is in the eye there are some red spots which are called as a Roth spots. All these findings, okay, in a patient having fever is very suggestive of infection of the heart called as infective endocarditis. Okay, I am not going into the details of why they are occurring, but please remember they are all associated features of infective endocarditis. Very important. Now the question is very simple now. In a patient with infected endocarditis, what other finding can be noted in abdomen? In fact, this is one of the common clinical findings we always note for when a patient is having fever along with the heart disease. What is that? Yes, it is splenomegaly is the answer for this particular question. We can find splenomegaly. In fact, that is one of the common clinical findings also we get in case of infective endocarditis. Let's move on to the next question. In a patient suffering from lymphoma, which of the following renal disorder is usually associated? Yes, what is the answer for this question? It's a straightforward question. There is no much explanation at all. Please remember, whenever the patient is having lymphoma, okay, or they might have given in the question like this, cancers, especially the breast cancer, okay, the association of malignancy with the renal disease is with, yes, it's a straightforward one-liner, it is membranous nephropathy. Okay, membranous nephropathy. Yes, it can typically present as a nephrotic syndrome. Okay, so cancers always know this association with membranous nephropathy. Okay, and one more important association with membranous nephropathy I would want you to remember is that membranous nephropathy, okay, there's a very high incidence, or the association is with something called as a renal vein thrombosis. Renal vein thrombosis. In a patient presenting with renal vein thrombosis, they ask you what could be the underlying renal disorder to be looked for. It's a very possible question, is membranous nephropathy. Let's move on to the next question. The next question is, in a patient presenting with arthritis of the hands and following finding, what is the possible diagnosis? What are you seeing? You are seeing the swelling of the fingers. Okay, this is what we call it as dactylitis, which is due to inflammation of the fingers. Dactylitis, and the appearance is what we call it as a sausage digits or sausage fingers. Okay, right? And in a patient having arthritis, okay, as well as dactylitis and sausage disease, it is very digits. It is very classical of what? Yes, it is psoriatic arthritis. Very important. Okay, for a patient to be diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, either he should have findings of psoriasis along with arthritis. That's why I am writing psoriasis plus arthritis, or the patient should have arthritis, and along with the arthritis he should have two of the following findings. Any two of the following findings. What could be the findings which are possible? One is a dactylitis, which is what is given in the picture. Second is nail pitting, right, that can be present. Third is psoriasis in a first degree relative. Psoriasis, that's a family history. Psoriasis in a first degree relative. Out of these three points I have mentioned, any two is present along with arthritis, then also you can say it's a case of psoriatic arthritis. Let's move on to the next question. The next question is a very important question. Previously also it has been asked in your exams. It's a 30-year-old female presenting with recurrent cough and following chest x-ray finding. Serum calcium and AC levels are elevated. What is the diagnosis? They are given the x-ray picture. You can see that in the x-ray picture there are some swellings in these two regions. Can you see that? There are some white masses in these two regions which are nothing but the enlarged, very enlarged lymph nodes. Okay, that is a hilar lymph node. It's a hilar lymphadenopathy. So now tell me the diagnosis. You need not even know the options, a straightforward diagnosis. Yes, because especially calcium is increased, AC levels are increased, cough is there, hilar lymphadenopathy is there. It is not tuberculosis, but it is what? Yes, it's a case of sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis, a very, very important topic for your exams. Okay, and sarcoidosis, please remember, it's a disease of unknown etiology. 50% of the patients are asymptomatic. Okay, and if at all they are symptomatic, lung is the most common site of involvement. And in the lungs, okay, it classically manifests as the lymphadenopathy, which I have put up in the picture, especially the hilar and the paratracheal lymphadenopathy. It can also present as interstitial lung disease. In the liver, the characteristic finding is granuloma and chronic liver disease. In the eye, it characteristically presents with uveitis. In the skin, there are two important findings. One is the erythema nodosum, which is usually noted over the legs, over the shin. Next is, okay, around the nose region, what we call it as a lupus pernio. Now, why in sarcoidosis there is an increase in the level of calcium is that sarcoidosis is due to excess of or increase of activated macrophages, and it is said that these activated macrophages are going to be associated with the production of increased levels of vitamin D, and this increased vitamin D will cause massive absorption of calcium and phosphorus, mainly calcium, from the gastrointestinal tract as well as the kidney. So that is why there is a increased levels of calcium, and they are also associated with increased production of ACE. It's actually one of the very important findings which you get in case of sarcoidosis. Because sarcoidosis is a very important topic, I just want to give some more info on this for your upcoming exams. Let's move on to the next question. A patient was exposed to cold while trekking in a mountain. After coming down, the patient was noted to have white finger with ulcers which turned blue in some time. After rewarming, they become intense red and painful. What is the diagnosis? Okay, we are not able to recollect all the options. Students were not able to recollect, but they were very sure about these two options, which is the answer for this question. Among these two, only is the answer for this question. One is the primary Raynaud phenomenon. Next is the secondary Raynaud phenomenon. What is the answer? You can see that there was exposure in the form of a cold. Okay, after exposure, what had happened? Initially, the patient was noted to have white or pale finger. Okay, white finger. Then it turned blue. Then after some time, once it became warm, it was very red and painful. This is called as Raynaud's phenomenon. Remember, there are two things: primary and secondary Raynaud phenomenon. Secondary Raynaud phenomenon is something which is associated with other systemic diseases. Okay, with other disorders, like for example, scleroderma. Okay, for example, the scleroderma and all. If it is associated, then it is called as secondary Raynaud phenomenon. Remember, in scleroderma, the classical findings of the skin becoming thick. Okay, there may be presence of calcified deposits and all. Nothing is mentioned in this question. So you can rule out secondary Raynaud phenomenon because features of other particular disorder, any other disorder, is not given, and so the answer for this question would be primary Raynaud phenomenon. Okay, and what is even more important as medical students is to know the findings which occur in Raynaud's phenomenon. What happens? Raynaud phenomenon is basically a condition of abnormality of the vessel or sensitivity of the vessel to stimulus. Okay, so initially what happens? The vessel will go in for vasospasm. So what happens? There will be decreased blood supply that results in the whiteness of the fingers. Now, after whiteness, because of prolonged decreased blood supply, okay, there would be appearance of bluish color. Okay, which is due to deoxygenated blood having cyanosis. Okay, giving cyanosis. Then what happens once the patient undergoes rewarming? Okay, again, now the blood supply will increase abnormally high. Okay, so what happens? It will become intense red. okay, intense red, or what we call it as the hyperemia. Okay, hyperemia means what, too much of redness. Okay, due to very increased blood supply occurring during rewarming. Intense redness, and very characteristic is that at this time the patient will have pain plus. Okay, right? And some of the patients, okay, of because of this intense reactions happening, they can also have associated ulcers also. They can also have associated ulcers in the hands also. These are the characteristic features of Raynaud's phenomenon which you need to remember. Okay, right. Now, what is the other thing which is given in the picture on the side of this slide? What is that? Yes, I told you Raynaud phenomenon can be primary or secondary. How do you differentiate? One is presence of systemic disorders like scleroderma. Second thing is you do this test called as nail fold capillaroscopy. Okay, what you do is you put an oil drop over the base of the nail, okay, and then examine it under the microscope. Okay, this is actually the full nail, something like this nail. That tip of that nail plate, no, that edge, you are looking under microscopy. That's all. This is a normal appearance of the capillaries at the nail bed. Are you able to follow? This is suggestive of primary Raynaud phenomenon. Suppose you have some abnormalities like form of dilated capillaries, absent capillaries, like that. You have any abnormality like this, dilated or absent capillaries, then it is suggestive of secondary Raynaud phenomenon. So this is also one more way of differentiating between primary Raynaud and secondary Raynaud. This also you need to know because this can be asked in the upcoming exam. Right. Moving on to the final question for this part 1 discussion. It is regarding the association of fluorosis of the bones. Osteosclerosis, osteomalacia, osteopetrosis and osteochondrosis. What is the answer? The answer for this question is osteosclerosis. Thickening, okay, thick bones, okay, osteosclerosis. That's a very characteristic feature of fluorosis when it affects the bone. Remember some points about this fluorosis. Fluorosis commonly affects the spine, vertebral column, okay, and the characteristic feature is, one is osteosclerosis. Second, very important, can be asked in the upcoming exam, is calcification of interosseous ligaments. Interosseous ligament, that is a ligament between two bones. And second is that in the vertebral column, calcification of sacrospinous ligaments. Very characteristic. Okay. Interosseous ligaments or interosseous membranes also. One more very characteristic is sacrospinous ligament. Now, fluorosis, what is the reason for this fluorosis? Because of excess intake of fluoride in the drinking water, okay, which is very unsafe, or it could be in the form of inhalation of dust or fumes by the workers. Okay, right. Those who are working in that sort of environment, they can have inhalational exposure. These are the two ways by which fluorosis can occur. Answer for this particular question is osteosclerosis. I know that some of the books also have mentioned rarely osteomalacia can occur, but that's a late finding and not given in all the books. But what is universally given and one of the very important association and the answer for this question is osteosclerosis. So that completes the part 1 discussion of medicine question asked in this August FMG 2020 exam. I have given you the link of the part 2 discussion also. It's also available under the description and the first comment in this particular video. Please do watch that. I also have a video about the question discussion for pediatrics questions which are asked in FMG August 2020. That's also shared in this picture as well as in the description below. Thanks for watching and I will see you soon in another video.